Something that is easy to come by, at least in my generation, the parents in my generation, they don't have to acknowledge they're wrong. They don't have to apologize for nothing. What they did is what they did. They did their best. They did what they knew to do. But when he apologized, I felt the ice, the stone, everything in that moment melted away. Just like that, like magic. So, I'm saying that to say that you, as the offender, and all of us have offended our spouses in one way or another, but you as the offender have the ability to free your spouse just by acknowledging and apologizing for your mess. It's your mess. Why not free your spouse? Why have them every night going through the memories and the frustrations and the aggravations and the hurt and the pain? Why not free your spouse from your mess with a simple apology and make it easy for them to forgive? Because they have to forgive. God said we have to forgive, right? And if you want to live a life that honors Christ, you're going to forgive. And there's repercussions for not forgiving. You see people, even people, there are studies where people have cancer and things like that, and they've related it to just having a heart of stone and just a lack of forgiveness and a lot of hurt that they're holding on to. I want you to realize how important you are to your own spouse's healing and restoration so that you can move forward in intimacy, because that hurt is really a blockage. Since then, I've been able to talk to my father, hug my father, be in the presence of my father. No, he's not perfect. He knows he's not perfect. He has issues. But whatever that thing was, that hurt that I carried for 27 years, just the abandonment, I would walk down the street and see little girls with their father and just cry, like, what happened to my daddy, I called him Papa. That was my Papa. Papa just forgot all about me. It melted away in an instant with an apology. And I was able to forgive. And trust me, y'all, I've been walking the life of a Christian for years and saying, I forgive him. He's got issues. I forgive him, though. We just got to pray for him. I forgive him. But it wasn't until he apologized and acknowledged his mess that I was free. And if you can do that, then you can open the door for all kinds of levels of intimacy, talking about all these issues openly. Because those things on the board, those issues on the board, some of those things you both disagree hardcore on and can't even talk about it. You can't even come to a common ground on any of those things. Some of those things on that board are off limits because you can't come to a common ground. There's something dividing you, keeping you apart. You need to know what those things are and ask your spouse for forgiveness or apologize to your spouse and then forgive so that you can move on.
So when we deal with infidelity, generally there are 4 classes of an affair. Class number 1 is what we call the one-night stand. That's, we went to Vegas. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. I went to Jamaica, and whatever I did there stays there. I went on a business trip, met a woman, had sex, no emotional connection. That was it. We move on. One-night stand. Second class of an affair is emotional entanglements. Right? So it doesn't always have to be sexual, but we connect it. Remember we talked about working for 8 hours a day? You ever heard of the term, my office spouse? Have you ever heard that before? Yeah. Emotional entanglement. An affair never starts in the bedroom, it ends in the bedroom. First it starts with an emotional connection. You can become so interwoven with someone's heart and their mind and their emotions that that's almost harder to jump back from than a physical affair. Number 3, sexual compulsion. There's just something physically, biologically that you can't control that keeps you going out again and again and again. And what you get from your partner is not enough. You got to have more, and you got to have more, and you got to have more. Sexual compulsion. And number 4, what Danielle's talking about, open-ended marriages where there are issues that have not been resolved. And if there's an issue that has not been resolved, and if there's a need that is not being met, then I will find someone, or I will stumble across someone who will meet the need in me that's not being met by my partner. So if there is an issue between us, then there's a problem. So our sex was affected because of relational issues. That shrunk her sexual desire. And it wasn't until we resolved those issues that all of a sudden her desire began to come back. So if there are issues that you haven't dealt with, I'm telling you now, it's going to impact your sexuality. So we're talking about sex. Now, as it relates to sex, you have to understand that there are 4 purposes for sex. 4. Number 1, procreation. Right? Number 2, recreation. Number 3, communication. Number 4, release. Sometimes you just need to release. You just have all of this stuff built up inside you and you need your partner and you just have to release. Sometimes you just want to have fun. You want to be recreational. You just want to have a good time. You want to switch it up. You want to do something different. And you just go at it. Then sometimes sex is a form of communication. You know, we talked about body language. Well, that's where sexuality comes in, because you can communicate your love and how you truly feel through your sexual interaction with one another. And obviously procreation, we know about that. So when you keep these 4 purposes in mind, it kind of helps you in your marriage, because some people are one-track minded, one-dimensional minded, and have been taught and indoctrinated to believe that the only reason, the only purpose for sex is to produce. So if the purpose is just to produce, because I know couples that will admit, you know, look at our number of kids. We have 7 kids, and we only had sex 7 times in our marriage. And every single time was the time we got pregnant, and that was it. Beyond that, that was it. And so they had a horrible sex life. You would think that they had a great one because they had all these children, but that's what they came into the relationship with. And one of the challenges that we have as Christians, if you've been born and raised in the church, you've been taught all your life that sex is evil, sex is wrong. You know, you come in with this negative perception of sex, right? Because as a single, you're not supposed to have it, which you should not. But if you've been taught, no, 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 do this, don't do that, and you have all of these psychological, biblical, indoctrinated teachings that are one-dimensional, once you say I do, you don't go through a metamorphosis and all of a sudden you become somebody different. You don't go through a transformation of your thinking. You bring your single self into your married life. So you're still operating with your single mindset about sex is bad, sex is dirty, sex is wrong. So now when you are free to do and to have and to be, you have all this apprehension because of all that you have been taught. So the church, while it does a good job of telling you, to a degree, of not to do, they don't often tell you why you should not do, but just not to do, they need to do a better job of encouraging couples to do and why they should do what they are doing. Does that make sense? So it's really changing your mental mindset. Now, as it relates to sexuality, there's certain marital patterns or sexual marital patterns that a lot of couples fall into. Now, one of the things up here was frequency. And what we know is that, generally speaking, when you first get married, that's when you have the most sex. You know, when you look at newlyweds and statistics and studies that have been done, it's been said that a lot of newlyweds can have sex 2, 3, 4 times a week, every opportunity, even more times a week. But over the course of time, all of a sudden it begins to wither and wane and significantly slow down. It's called the honeymoon effect, right? The honeymoon effect basically means we're no longer in that honeymoon state. Now we have bills and babies and doctor's appointments and all these obligations in church and extracurricular activities, and we put sex and sexuality way down at the bottom of the priority list. And so some of us, if not both of us, feel neglected. And all of a sudden we're no longer emotionally connected because we're not physical anymore. And it's often been said when couples stop touching, that's a sign and an indication that there's a problem in their relationship. And so there was a doctor who did a study, and he basically compared it to a jar of marbles. He said, if you were to take a marble and put it in a jar for every time a couple had sex in their first year, and took that same marble out for every time they had sex in their second year and beyond, you would never run out of marbles in that jar. So the frequency, generally speaking, is not as consistent the longer you're together because of what? Newness. There's no more newness. And that's what we kind of want to talk about, bringing newness back into your relationship. And so what happens is we have a now you see it, now you don't sex life. We go from 100 miles an hour to 0. And so when it comes to the marital sex patterns, there's a few sex patterns that we want to acknowledge and talk a little bit about. If I can find a marker. Where's the marker?
There, right there.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Okay. Marital sex patterns. Okay. Duty sex. Duty sex. Obligation sex. You know, conjugal rights of a spouse is to have sex with your husband. And when it becomes a duty, when it becomes a chore, it's no longer a delight. It becomes, this is my responsibility. It takes on a different tone. Now, yes, the scripture is very clear that your body does not belong to you, right? And so you should not deprive your partner or your